Aloha. Today's episode is brought to you by the Western Extension Risk Management Education Center, USDA NIFA, and the University of Hawaiʻi College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources, and the Livestock Extension Group.
Aloha. Welcome everyone to the Livestock Wala'au, a podcast aimed to provide educational support, information, guidance, and outreach to our livestock stakeholders in Hawaiʻi. We are your hosts, Mele Oshiro and
Shannon Sand.
And today we're going to be speaking with Dr. Dillion Feuz about some tools that he's spent year working on developing for our Hawaii cattle producers, specifically our folks that are exporting animals, and also looking at some grass finished stuff here in Hawaii. So Dillion, do you want to maybe tell us a little bit more about the decision support tools? I think we had you on before to kind of gather everybody to see if they provide some background and feedback for the tools and information. And now the tools have been developed, we kind of want to share what you've developed and how folks can use these tools.
Yes.
Yes, aloha to you and everybody on the podcast. Just a couple of things. I think I'll share a couple of PowerPoint slides first, just to kind of set the stage for a couple of things that the tools are trying to accomplish. And so I'll go through that fairly quickly, but I think it just helps to kind of recognize, here's one of the problems out there,
right,
and this is why the tools. So let me go ahead and share that PowerPoint screen.
All right. And while you do that, I just want to let the folks that are just listening to this know that there is a video that's on YouTube as well that will go through all these steps and different images that we will be talking and discussing here on the podcast, but we will also try to do our best on our podcast to kind of describe what we're looking at and how these tools are, I should say Dillion will, but do know that there is a video version of this as well. So you can look at these images that we're talking about.
So welcome everybody. Just a quick couple of slides to kind of set the stage for what we're trying to do with the web-based decision tools. This is just a graph here of mainland cattle prices. It's not reflective of Hawaii prices, but I'm only putting it up there to show that prices vary over time. They go up, they go down. And the question becomes, is all of that unknown? Or for some of that, can we know ahead of time that those prices are going to be higher or lower? Another example of some more short-term price variability. Again, a couple of mainland cattle prices from October and November of 2018 and 2020. And I just highlight here how quickly prices can change even within a year, in this case, 1 month. So in October 2018, prices were $10 per hundredweight higher or 10 cents per pound higher than in November. So that'd be a difference of $55 on a 550-pound calf, as compared to 2020, when prices in November were $6 or 6 cents per pound higher, and so an increase of $33. So, the question is, should you sell calves in October or November, or can you know from 1 year to the next whether prices will be higher or lower? So, if you're not familiar, there is a futures market. Chicago Mercantile Exchange runs a futures market for feeder cattle. And basically, we can look to that market to try to gauge what prices may be at some future point in time. Those futures markets usually go a little over a year out in advance. So I can look at next month's prices. I can look at prices 3 months from now, or 6 months, or almost a year, and try to get some idea of at least what the traders, the experts in the markets, are thinking might happen. So this is just a screenshot from a few days ago of the futures markets. So April was currently trading at 157.85, so that'd be $1.57 or $1.58 per pound. But you can see, you can go out. In this case, I only went out as far as October. But looking at this, what it does tell us is that at least the traders right now and the experts are agreeing that feeder cattle futures prices should gradually rise between now and summer and on into fall. So if you're a producer and you're going to be selling calves this fall, then right now the expectations are those prices will likely be higher than the current prices are. So I'm not trying to get anybody to trade futures. I'm just trying to get you to look at that market to understand. And I'll show you when we get into the tools how you can quickly get to this site and see that.
For those that are listening, just listening right now, Dillion, I want to give them this, see if they can go back to reference, but which column here? So there's a few different columns and I see that you're talking about, but which column here, there's a last open high and low. What are you actually looking at for this one? Which column should you reference?
To me, the last is the main one I'm looking at. That's, in this case, this was after trading had ended that day. So it was the closing price or the last price. But even if you're looking at this during a trading day, the high, the low is just going to show where prices had traded that day. The last is always going to be the most recent price, or if it's the close, it'll be the closing price. So I usually just look at that last price as the one to kind of base off. Here's where the market is currently. Okay, so just, you might say, well, how does this relate to calf prices? Well, that feeder cattle market is really based off those 12 green states highlighted in green, and it's for 700 to 900 pound steers. So two things happen. The further you may move away geographically from that green area, it's likely that prices are going to be lower because of transportation. And as you change weights, that will change the price. So lighter calves tend to be priced higher than heavier calves. So if we were looking at 450 pound calves, we would expect that price to be higher. And as long as you know that general relationship, then that's what can help you get an idea of what your calf price might be relative to that set of prices that they base the futures off of, if that makes sense. So just looking at the April contract, so this is the one that's currently trading, you can see that back in December, January, the expectation was prices would be around $1.70 per hundredweight or $1.70 per pound. And then something occurred in late February that has dropped that price, and to where now the expectations are only that prices will be around 156, 157. So I'm going to talk about what is likely the result, what likely caused that drop in those prices. But we might think about the futures market. If we say it's efficient in terms of no expert can generally consistently outguess or outperform the futures market in terms of predicting future prices. But as conditions change, then we would expect prices change. So it's not, most of the time you see markets move throughout the year that the contract is listed because things change. Fed cattle prices change. Corn prices move. Range and pasture conditions change. The amount of cattle placed in the feedlot change. And so as those changes occur, then the market reacts to them. And so we have to continually update what we expect to happen with prices. Right. So this is a chart of live cattle prices over that same time frame. And you can see they varied a little, but the prices today are essentially about equal with prices in December. So we wouldn't think that that would have too much impact on the feeder cattle prices. But if we look at what's happened with corn prices, you can see that corn prices have greatly increased since February. Well, I think most of this is due to the Russian-Ukraine conflict and the concern that grains will not be getting out of that part of the world. And Ukraine is not a huge exporter of corn, but they are of grains in general, of wheat primarily. And I think there's just a concern in the marketplace that grains in general will be in short supply. And so that is also then saying corn will be short because there'll be some substitution between corn and wheat. And that's running the prices higher. Well, if I'm a feedlot and I'm expecting to sell my steers at the end for the same price, but I'm going to have to pay a lot more for my grain, then I'm going to try to buy feeder cattle for less money to put into my feedlot. Okay, so that's kind of on a national level of what's going on, and we can, look at that. But how does that compare to our local prices? Well, we call the difference between our local price and that CME feeder futures price, we refer to that as basis or basis risk. And so our local prices tend to reflect national prices, but they also vary individually. Local weather events can impact that. For example, a year and a half ago when we had the big fires on the Big Island of Hawaii, that may have impacted when people were taking cattle to markets. And so that could have impacted local prices. Also, if we have more buyers or more sellers in a given market time frame, that can change. Or transportation is obviously a huge factor impacting Hawaii prices. And so right now with the surge in fuel prices, it's probably likely that Hawaii prices relative to mainland prices are going to move lower to reflect that higher transportation costs. So we have to keep track of local conditions as well as national conditions. So one of the things that we can do is try to learn historical relationships and then use that to predict cash prices in the future. So I've taken two different markets here, Washington State and Texas markets, and looked at auction prices over time, over the last 5 years, averaged them. And so these prices here, this reflects the basis or how much the prices are higher or lower than the Chicago Mercantile Exchange feeder cattle futures. So in the case of lighter calves, you see that they're typically higher than that futures, and the heavier ones, the 750, 850, are typically negative or below that futures market. You can also see that those prices vary spring to fall, and they vary from one location to the other. So in the tools that I've put together, I use this information to try to predict prices. Now, the challenge was to try to come up with what those prices should be for Hawaii relative to the futures market. Hawaii does not report any auction market prices, so there's really no publicly available prices. I reached out with a survey and got a limited number of responses back. I also talked to the Hawaii Cattlemen's Cooperative, talked to a few producers personally, tried to get a few prices, and this is my best estimate of how these prices compare relative to the Chicago futures. It doesn't appear that there's too much seasonality or difference between spring and fall. And if anything, right now, these prices may be a little high because these were done before we had the big surge in fuel prices. And so with that big surge in fuel prices, we may see these prices being a little more discounted than what they currently are. So let me go ahead then. So this is setting the stage for what we're trying to do with the tools. It will be available on the Hawaii Rangeland site that will get links put out to people. Maybe we can put them on your podcast at a future point in time. But what it does is give a very brief description. I have 6 different tools on here. Let me just walk through one of them to kind of discuss what
Yeah.
the tool does? And
That sounds good. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then
So
we
this
have
is
some
the
questions.
what we're actually looking at for those that are listening. It's just the Rangelands website is a site managed by Arizona State University where we have the Hawaii Rangelands information. So there's all different types of publications and resources. And this is where these tools will be held. And the publication that Dillion spoke about will be on this site as well as our CTAR extension publication site, and that'll give you a walkthrough of how to use the tools and everything else. So,
Okay, so I'm going to use one of these. This the Stalker West Coast tool is going to basically assume that you're a producer here in Hawaii. You have not yet sold or shipped your cattle, and you're going to be looking at what you could perhaps sell your cattle for, the gate price here at Hawaii versus what you could do if you took them to the mainland and kept ownership for some period of time. And so we'll work a couple of examples of that. So we're going to start off assuming that your cattle will get shipped to the West Coast market. And so we'll use those Washington state prices that I showed you. A few of them, we'll use those in the tool. So this is the tool that pops up. It's completely live. You can, whenever you change one number, it'll change all the associated calculated values. So in the tool, the green cells are ones that you can change as a user of the tool, and then the blue cells get calculated for you. So the first thing we have to do is choose when we're wanting to sell or ship the cattle. So I know kind of from the information I've obtained, there's kind of two major shipping periods on the island. There's kind of a spring shipping period and a fall that match up with a fall and a spring calving scenario. So let's go ahead and use kind of a current time frame. We'll go ahead and say that we're going to ship the cattle kind of immediately right now, end of April, 1st of May. So we'll use April for the month. And then we can decide whether we want a 425 pound, a 400, a 450. So if you knew the approximate weight of your animals, you could put that in there. So just for changing it up, I'll put that our calves will be weighing 450 pounds. So then to get an estimate of the Hawaii gate price, if you click on this CME feeder cattle link, it's going to take us directly to that CME feeder cattle futures. I showed a screenshot of that, but here, this is live. This is as of today. So let's see, we are 9:30 this time, so it's 1:30. The market is still trading live, so it could still change a little today. But April today is at 156.40. That's the last price. And what this change shows is how much that price changed from Mondays or Fridays. Today is a Monday that we're recording this. So this is showing that it's down from the Monday. But we'll go ahead and enter the 156 in the cell. So I'm going to go back to the tool, click back. And so if I put in 156, and maybe I'll just round it to that and won't put the 44 cents. So that's like $1.56 a pound or 156 a hundred. Then it's telling me that the estimated price I might receive in Hawaii today is 119. If you have talked to a buyer and he's offered you a different price, you can go ahead and put that price in, and it will use that price rather than this suggested price. So you can accept the projected price, or you can enter a different price. So for example, I was on the Big Island Thursday and Friday, talked to a producer who had just sold some cattle for $1.15 rather than $1.19. So maybe we'll go ahead and enter the $1.15 just to show how that works. So we can put 115 in there. And then we need to consider our freight, how much it would cost us. So what this is saying is we're not actually selling the calves yet, but we're saying if we sold them, we could get 115. And then we're going to compare what we can do if we keep ownership to that 115 price. So ocean freight, the last I checked, was 250. Again, that could be increasing. I don't know if the shippers have increased their rates yet or not. We'll go ahead and leave it at the 250 just for sake of argument. Trucking, it may cost you $6 or $7 per head to get your cattle to the port, and then another $5 or $6 to get them from the port in the mainland to wherever you're going to be. In this case, I'm going to assume they're going on to grass somewhere. So we'll leave that. Maybe we'll up that a little, since I know diesel costs have definitely
make it $11 or $12 a head.
Yeah, we'll put it in there.
But that is the nice thing with this, is anything in this, is this a green color?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So anything in the green, I'm assuming we can pretty much change ourselves.
Yeah.
Yes, that's how it's designed. That's correct, Shannon. And so then you can decide how long your cattle are going to be in the program. So we could have them grazing for 90 days, 120 days. So if they're basically starting 1st of May in Washington, we should have good grass for May, June, July, August, maybe into September. The grass would still be good. So I'm guessing you'd probably go with 120 to 150 day grazing program if you were going to do that. So let's split it. Let's go with 135 days. Just say we'd get into maybe mid-September. And then we can estimate how much average day to gain we expect on that grass. And I've put in a default here of 1.5 pounds a day. Depending on the year, depending on how heavy you're stocking, how long you go. If you only go into early August, you might get a little more than that. If you go clear into late September, early October, you'd probably get a little less than that, because the grass is probably losing some of its, it's getting more mature and losing some of its protein energy content. But we can go ahead and leave that at 1.5 pounds. And so what that shows is that at the end of that program, you started with a 450 pound calf. If it gains 1.5 pounds a day for 135 days, with some shrink estimated for the transportation, we'd expect that animal to weigh 639 pounds, basically mid-September. So then now it's asking me to record the last price for the September futures. So I can go back, I can click that and come back to the September futures. And September today is priced at 177.82 or almost 178. So again, we're thinking markets will be higher in the fall than they are today, which is a good thing if I'm keeping ownership of cattle.
Right.
So I can come back and put the 178 in here, or I could put the 177 and whatever amount of cents that was. And it tells me the model, based on those historical price relationships in Washington State, says a 640 pound, 639 pound steer calf in September should be just slightly higher than that futures market. So we're basically at 178.64, which would be $1,011.42 per head. Well, how much is that going to cost me? This 175, I was working another example. That's probably a little high. I tried to look up some recent grazing rates for Washington State. I couldn't find any. I found some grazing rates for this year for Nebraska grasslands. It's at $1 a head per day, roughly. So we could maybe put something in there along those lines. So maybe if we back this off to 150 for the grazing portion of the program, or if you've got a relationship with somebody on the mainland that you could reach out to and say, how much would you charge me to graze my cattle for that time? Then you could put that number in here and have an even more accurate number. We might also have some other costs associated with that. Maybe we need to do some vaccinations, some fly tags. Some people choose to implant their cattle with a steroid, a growth implant. Some, if you're trying to stay on a organic label, then you wouldn't do that. So you have options. You could either do that or not do that, and that may change how much these veterinary, medical, or other supplies cost you. I'm going to go ahead and leave it at $20 just for sake of argument. We typically see some death loss in most retained ownership programs. I mean, it's not high, but maybe 1.5%, 2%. You know, animals get struck by lightning. Sometimes you get something that bloats on something, or there's poisonous plants on different rangelands. So again, cattle just die. It's probably wise to at least consider possibility that some could. So I'll leave that at 1.5%. Interest rates, if you're not selling those cattle, then maybe you're going to have to borrow money. So if you're having to borrow money to pay for these feed expenses, you'd want to put that in there. If you're not borrowing any money, if you're using your own cash, you could lower that rate to maybe what you could get as a return if that money was just in savings, which isn't very much right now. Certainly borrowing rates are starting to go up.
That's what I was going to say. We could have I would love to have a whole discussion with you at some point on inflation and the cost rises happening, you know. So
yeah, you deal with that more than I do in terms of the accounting issues and how inflation and interest rates.
It's going to be an interesting few years, I think, to be honest, Dillion. So I think something like this could be really helpful to people when they're needing to put it
trying to make a decision on what's best, right? Exactly.
Yeah, and let's just play with an interest rate. Let's take a real low interest rate. Let's say we're only at 3%.
Yeah.
And that gives me a total feeding period cost of $195.
Yeah.
If we jump those rates to 8%.
Yeah. Yeah.
That increases at $12 per head.
Per head. Yeah.
So that's, you think about that, that starts to be real money if you're doing 100 head or something. So
it adds
we've
up.
kind of gone, 8-10 years where we haven't paid much attention to interest rates.
We've been spoiled. I'm not even going to lie. I've enjoyed life a lot. last few months has been interesting. So
yeah. And I've got enough gray hair that I remember when interest rates on short-term money for ranching
for double digits.
Yeah. 15,
I remember learning about it in
sometimes.
School, but haven't lived through it.
The ranch I grew up on, we were in that vicious cycle where there was a lot of interest rates. And then you definitely, you shop for interest rates. You went in and cried to your banker wanting lower interest rates. I hope we're not headed to that time frame, but certainly that's something that we will have to watch closer. And this tool lets you do that. If you go to a bank and you get that interest rate, then you can put whatever rate that is into the tool and observe what that does to your economics. So then in this case, we conclude with kind of this is a summary then of what's happened. We could sell the calf at the end of that period in September for $1,142 a head. Our initial calf, had we sold it, we could have sold it for $518 per head. Our transportation between our shipping, ocean shipping, and our truck shipping was estimated at $262. Our feeding costs in terms of the grass, our vaccinations, any supplies estimated at $207. And that gives us a net return for this 4.5 month feeding period of $155
Yeah.
per head. Most of that is the result of the market expecting to increase during this time frame, because the current futures are at 157, I think it was.
Yeah, it was lower. Yeah.
Yeah, 156, and we're projecting April to be at 178.
Kind of
So
that time of year though. Yeah.
that is most of why you're seeing that increase.
Yeah.
If in fact we don't get that full increase, let's say we only get a 165 futures market. So I'm just going to change this to show you what can change. So if that market only increases to 165, then that drops our net return to 72.
Yeah. Okay. Can I ask a question? Because I was like, I don't know how many people I'm making assumptions here when I'm looking at your spreadsheet and stuff, because we're assuming everyone's shipping to the West Coast and not like Texas or wherever else. Because, well, one, that's much further away. So it would just cost you money more probably in the long run anyways. But I'm going with the assumption that the price, since it's estimated to be 165.64, we're dealing with a positive basis. Do you want to talk about basis just a little bit in case? Because I was like, from what I've seen in Hawaii, we don't deal a whole lot with that here, just because, again, a lot of times it is sold to like your neighbor if it's not just sold, again, like in this situation where you're selling a large lot off island.
Right. So, yeah. And whether you sell in Washington on the West Coast or in Texas or somewhere in the Southwest,
right,
those prices are going to be a little different. And we actually there's a separate tool. This is the West Coast stalker one. There is a Southwest stalker one.
Oh, okay, good.
Shipping into Texas. And so then this basis would be estimated differently. So behind the scenes, what as a user, what you're not seeing is historical data that is generating what this price is relative to the futures price. So this says over the last 5 years, in September, a calf weighing 640 pounds should be just slightly over, in terms of 64 cents per hundredweight, over the futures market. Let me just change this so we get a different weight calf. If we change this number of days down to 120, then we get a lighter calf. And then you can see the lighter calf is expected to sell for even more money.
Right.
So it's
your return is lower per head too. Look at that. It's 62 versus I think it was one something. Yeah.
You're not feeding it as long. And so you're not putting that weight on. One thing to always remember in a retained ownership program, any kind of retained ownership, if you can add weight for less than what the market prices are, that will be making you money. If it's costing you more to add that weight than what the market price is that you're going to sell at, that program's probably not going to make you money.
I mean, that's the nice thing with this tool, though, is like that's a 15-day difference between 120 and 135. And that's a lot of money.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a good bit of difference in terms of your return, per head,
because we're changing the weight gain, we're changing the price. So all of those things change. So you as the user of this tool, as a producer, you could go through and say, oh, do I want to go for 120?
Yeah.
Or do I want to go for 150 days? And maybe at 150 days, I drop my weight just a little. Maybe I only get,
1.4, 1.45 or something.
Yeah, I was going to go 1.45 and see what that does. But you can see that actually makes us even.
I was going to say that actually worked out. Okay.
It makes us more money because we are still adding a few more pounds to that animal.
Yeah.
And in this case, we're getting a heavy enough animal that now our cash price is slightly below the futures market. So we've gone to a negative basis because we have a little heavier calf.
Yeah. So I guess that's my other question, since you have one for the Southwest as well with Texas and them. And I'm assuming Texas, kind of Oklahoma, would all qualify for that area. Correct?
Yeah. So I'm just using kind of one market and recognize
it'd be a lot easier. Yeah. Cause that's a lot.
Because people could go, you could have your calves in New Mexico, or Oklahoma or Kansas. You can ship to anywhere. Same way with Washington, Oregon, California.
Right.
I've
That's
just
nice.
picked a couple markets to try to give a general estimation of what prices.
Well, I think a lot of them here, my understanding, Mele, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think a lot of them ship to the West Coast, but I know there are some that ship to the Southwest. I don't know exactly where, but I know there's a few.
Yeah, regardless,
Yeah.
they're going to hit on the West Coast. So when you go down further, you're going to have
Yeah.
a higher trucking cost.
Well,
I
that's
think,
what I was
too,
thinking is it
for
almost
sure.
might be more expensive depending on the trucking costs and stuff. So that interest rate's going to play, I think, a big role in the next, it's currently playing a big role now, but like in the next year or so, even with this. So.
Yeah. So let me point out another thing on this tool. This return is basically the return above selling this calf for $518 per head on the island. It does not say anything about what it costs you to raise that calf up to that 450 pounds. There's a publication and a spreadsheet. Maybe I'll just pull up the publication quickly that's done by University of Hawaii CTAR on telling about how you can calculate that cost of production. So that's in there. There's a whole big spreadsheet on that. And so if you are interested in what your cost of raising that calf to the selling point is, you would need to go here. The other thing that I've done then on that spreadsheet, we have just, I changed the price here and said, well, what if it only went to 156 or 165 rather than the 174? So if I put that back at 174, it'll make us more profitable. But obviously, we don't know what it's going to be. But again, we can look back historically and see how much contracts typically change over a 4 or 5 month time frame and model that risk. And so that's what this graphic here at the bottom says. It says, yes, we're expecting this 139, or in this case, it's right at 138. We're expecting that return, but we know that prices can vary up or down from that. And so it's saying 2/3 of the time, you'd expect in the worst case, if prices kind of fell from what they currently are, that you'd still be at a positive 47, or it could get up as much as $230 per head. 90% of the time, so we get down in here in this area, then we could start to see some losses. So that's saying basically in 1 out of 10 years, the market may swing enough that rather than making $139 a head, you could end up losing 17, or in very rare circumstances, you get out here in the tails. We probably don't need to plan much for those, but occasionally those kind of crashes happen when something major impacts the market. For example, if all of a sudden the U.S. got foot and mouth disease in their cattle, well, that could have a major impact on the markets, and we could see it swing more than what we typically see. But I would say, it's probably pretty easy to say, our returns could vary quite easily between this 47 and 230, or even if you did a little narrow range and said, okay, I'm 140 plus or minus $50. That's only letting prices vary $5 per hundredweight. Well, we can get that variation, as I showed you earlier, from 1 month to another month. So that's what this graph is trying to show you. It's not without risk. So should we look at the Texas example?
I think that would be a lot of fun.
The spreadsheet, the tool looks identical. The difference is behind the scenes. Now this is based off Texas prices rather than Washington prices.
Right.
And then we'll have to adjust the transportation that we're considering. So we could do the same type of scenario. Let's assume that we are putting them in today.
Mhm.
We'll go with that same 450-pound calf. Our futures market quotes again, April, we're still at 156. So we'll put that in. Just to show you I can do it, I'll put the 156.40. So it's saying again, our price is at 119. Again, we could, maybe we're a bigger producer and we're running a little higher volume of cattle. And so we might get that 119 from the Hawaii base price.
Right.
Whereas a small producer may get a few dollars less just because that buyer is having to
source from
buy
other
up 2 or
places in
3,
order to make sure they have a uniform lot to go.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. They got to buy up 2 cattle from 2 or 3 producers to make
Yeah,
a load. Maybe they're feeding them for a few days themselves. So let's go ahead and leave the 119.40. So we'll just put that in here at 119. So our ocean freight, if we're going ocean, maybe it's the same.
I would
Some
expect trucking
producers
to be
are
a bit more
loading
expensive.
up a plane and shipping them that way.
Oh, directly. Yeah, they could.
Which could get them to Texas. But we could, let's assume that we're doing the same ocean freight, but then we're putting them on a semi and going from California across
to Texas.
like, what is that, I-10 that goes across to Texas?
Yeah.
Or I-40, somewhere, one of those.
I would not have a clue. That would be you guys.
I know 40 goes through Oklahoma and Texas, if I recall correctly. So that might be the one. I don't remember. I've never driven all the way to California.
The Texas Panhandle.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'd probably need to increase this trucking.
Right.
Because we're probably going to be trucking those. That's probably West Coast to Texas Panhandle. I'm thinking is at least 1,000 miles, isn't it? And
it's a lot.
Think, but I'm just trying to do some quick calculations in my head. If diesel is $5, and I think it's roughly $5 that you can consider your cost, the cost of diesel per loaded miles. We'd have 5,000 divided by, you could put roughly 100 head on a semi. So we're looking at like $50 a head.
It's considerable. I would imagine it would be considerably more if they're trucking them. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's throw in a $50 per head.
Okay.
Trucking cost on that. And
you're negative right now. We haven't finished filling it in, but I'm just looking down there. I'm like, oh no.
Yeah, we'll put some futures price in here, and that'll help. But we'll see. So then we could get into the Southwest, and again, we have to decide. Maybe we're just going to do a dry lot background program where we're going to feed them some silage. Yeah. And add some weight. So let's say we're only going to do that for 90 days. Okay. So we'll do a 90-day program. We'll probably get better than 1.5 pounds a gain on that. 2.5, or you think more? Yeah, that's just what I was thinking. So we'll go with 2.25. We'll split the difference. Yeah. So then we're getting almost the same weight of calf that we did with the 150-day grazing program. Right. But we're doing it in a shorter program. Right. And feeding them probably some hay and silage, maybe a little grain to build them up. Okay. So now we've got to look at the August feeder cattle board. So we can click on that link and go to the board. And so August is at 174.77. The last price. So we could come back and enter that in. And so it's estimating that we'll be at 170. So we'll be $4, just under $4 under the futures, or negative relative for a 640-pound calf in the Texas market. Yep. So now our feed costs, let's see, how many pounds did we gain? We gained 450 to 650, 200 pounds. I think our feed costs on a silage program are probably going to be closer to $200 a head. You're probably about $1 per pound of gain right now on a silage, given where corn prices have gone. So if we put $200 here, and if we leave these other costs the same, we're basically getting down to where we're just not much more than break even price on that program.
Yeah. But I mean, that could change, because if you look at like a few years ago when gas was cheap, or like even a couple years ago, I mean, it would have been a different situation.
Right.
I mean, that fuel makes a lot of that difference too.
Right. And if they're actually flying, if they actually fly straight in as well, instead of going ocean and truck, then that also makes
you
a
probably
difference.
Still have $10 a head in freight charges though, but yeah.
Right.
Yep. So that's the game you can play with this tool, is you can say, oh, it's going to cost me a lot to truck them. Let me see what I could do if I flew them right into Texas. Right. And so maybe I don't think the flight will cost too much more, but let's say we up that to $260, and then we only have the $12 trucking, similar to what we had on the other. Mm-hmm. Okay, now we're up to, we just made $35 a head, rather than $7. Right. And so that's to me, what I'm trying to do with these tools is let producers come in and make assumptions, try some different things, so that paper feeding cattle usually is more profitable than really feeding cattle, but at least it gives you an opportunity to maybe not make some critical mistakes. And so if you say, oh yeah, I've always just shipped my cattle to California and then put them on truck to New Mexico. Well, maybe because of the higher fuel prices, that decision won't turn out as well as it used to. And so this tool lets you, kind of explore that, and then explore, oh, well, what are my options? What could I do differently? And so you can come in and change those things up a little.
Yeah.
The other thing that might happen, different feedlots, different producers, different areas have different crops that they could be feeding. And so maybe rather than a silage program, maybe you're somewhere, like if you're in Idaho, for example, a lot of times they can feed some potato waste as part of that backgrounding program. Well, maybe those costs haven't gone up as much as corn. And so if you were doing this in Washington, maybe rather than $200, maybe you're down at $175. Yeah. And so you can go back and forth, play out a couple of these scenarios, and decide which one may at least provide you the best opportunity moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, this is kind of it's a good way to go in and like play kind of a what if scenario if you have a few different options for what you can do with your calves, So.
Yeah, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And are there some more things that we'd like to just talk about in terms of, we had a little discussion on the interest rate. We've had some discussion on transportation, other things that you see as critical that perhaps we talk about, and how we could maybe look at that on one of these tools.
Nothing that comes to mind at this moment, but you were the creator of this tool, so you know it better than I do. I feel like. So I was like, what do you, I think this is a really powerful tool, and it has a lot of potential for people who are trying to look at their options and decide, in particular right now and in the future, like what is my best scenario to go with at this moment in time, or to look at and think the potential options are for the future. But yeah, what about you? I know that's kind of why you designed it, but.
Yeah. So one of the things that came out as I mentioned, I met last week in person with a few different producers, and we went through the tool with them. And one of them said, "Oh, I could use this tool to maybe bargain for a little better price in Hawaii if I'm selling the calves in Hawaii. If I can work through this tool, and if there looks like there's a big profit in keeping ownership, then I could go to that buyer and say, look, the likely return is, a couple $100. That seems a little excess. I know you're taking on some risk, but maybe can't we get the Hawaii gate price up another 10 cents a pound or something for me, and so that I'm getting a little of that return and you're still getting a good return on the cattle." Now, whether that will work or not, it depends on how much leverage you have, how bad the buyer wants your calves, how bad he needs them. In some cases, those buyers are probably responding to feedlots or people putting calves on grass. And if those people are saying, hey, we need some more cattle, then they may be a little more willing to come up in price. Whereas if that buyer is trying to have to hunt for somewhere to put those cattle, then he's probably not going to be willing to raise the price too much. But at least the tool may give you an opportunity. Or the other thing, I'll just show you on these feeder cattle markets. All right, so if we were looking at the current market, April, so we can pull up on any of these things, this little blue symbol symbolizes a chart. And so we can look at that chart. Wait for it to come up. Got to change it to days. So we can look at that chart and see what prices have done over the last few days. In this case, the markets have stayed fairly constant for about the last 10 days. But if we were marketing back in this time frame here, where the prices had come up 10 or 15 cents per pound or $10 or $15 per hundredweight over the last week or two, and the buyer was still offering me the same price that I know he'd offered my neighbor 2 weeks ago, well, then I could say, I know the futures market is now 10 cents a pound higher. Why are you still offering me the same price? Why can't you come up at least 7 or 8 cents? So I think, again, that's my hope, is that these tools, come back here. I hope that these tools can help. To me, the more educated you are about what's going on in the market, the better you are at negotiating. You won't always get the price you want. That's just the nature of the market. But I feel like if you can show this, talk to a buyer, again, in some circumstances, maybe it only gets you 2 or 3 cents, but that's, that can wind up being $20, $30 per calf. Yeah. And sometimes that's enough to buy something you're needing right now. So that's my hope with the tools, is that not just that the people that use them aren't just those who know they're going to be taking cattle to the mainland, but even if you're selling them here, you can use it to get an idea of, oh, maybe we can do that. Now, I think, Melly, at the introduction, you mentioned a grass finishing budget. So I'm working pretty heavily right now with Mark Thorne, and we're working on a similar tool for grass finishing. We don't have that one completed yet, but that will be another option that we'll put on this same website where people can look at, okay, I don't like the price that I'm being offered to sell my calves, and I've got a little extra grass. What could my return maybe look like if I kept those calves and finished them on grass in Hawaii? And so we're working on that tool. Mark has done some work at the Melalani Research Station. Melalani for several years. And so he's got some historical data on what kind of gains we might expect on calves. We've got some data on the carcass merit of those, how many might grade choice, select, and so what kind of price they could receive. So we're trying to build that into a tool that producers can again use. And we recognize that grass conditions vary from year to year and vary from location on the islands, different grasses. So it's a little more complicated tool. It's taken us a little longer to get all the kinks worked out, but we hope to have that again. Maybe by June. We're planning some field days in May and June, and we're hoping maybe to have at least a rough draft of that tool ready to show people and get some feedback at that point in time.
That'd be good. I think there's so much different little points in a grass finish system that kind of influences everything, right? From your gains to your quality of that animal and whatnot. So, and very variable, like you said, with the amount of forage or type of forage and quality of the forage across the island really does change. So, good.
Yeah,
that'd be great.
And whether you supplement or not, well, you can supplement and get better gains, but then you've got to put the cost of that supplement in. So the tool will hopefully be able to show very clearly whether that pays off or not in terms of, okay, I can know how much that supplement costs.
Right.
If it gets me enough of additional gain, it's worth it. If it doesn't, it's not. And so we're trying to build those scenarios into that tool.
Cool. So you mentioned too the prices, the future prices based on a certain region of states. Yeah, you showed that map. So how different, like if we go more West Coast, I mean, the futures price, how much influence or change do you really see if it goes? Like, is there, I don't know, I guess maybe you want to talk a little bit about that because you said it will fluctuate a little bit, but.
Yeah, so I've looked, it's been several years ago, but there's some video auction markets on the mainland that are pretty popular in some areas. And so those are a good market to collect data where the market conditions are the same. And then you can look at cattle being purchased in Washington, Wyoming, Kansas, Nebraska. And you can also get where the destination of those cattle are going. So is the buyer trucking them from Wyoming into Kansas, or are they going from Wyoming to Texas? Are they going from Washington just to a feedlot in Idaho? So you can get all that data. And what I've found in looking at that is that Nebraska tends to have the highest calf prices. So if you took the identical calf, let's say a 500-pound Angus cross calf, put it in Nebraska, it's going to receive typically the highest price. As you move west, that price for that same calf is going to be decreased. But interestingly, it's not decreased by the full amount of transportation. In other words, the buyer is picking up some of the transportation cost in that price. So if the cost was $10 to truck that calf from, say, Utah to Nebraska, and if the calf was worth $500 in Nebraska, it would maybe be worth $493 in Utah. And so it discounted at $7 for the calf, but not the full $10. Then there's some fluctuation based on quality. For example, northern cattle typically grade a little better than southern influence cattle because the southern cattle have a little more Brahma influence to deal with the heat in the Southwest. And so those calves, when they feed out, they know that they're not going to typically grade as many choice or upper choice. And so the northern states tend to get a little higher price than the southern states. All those things can also vary a lot by individual producer reputation. If you've started to build up a reputation you get a little better price than not. And
Right.
here's one where the state of Montana has a pretty good reputation as a pretty quality cow-calf state. Their prices for the cattle trucked the same distance from Montana as from Idaho, Wyoming, Utah. If you have the same distance in trucking, the Montana price tends to be a little higher than the Utah, Idaho price. So those basis numbers are mainly reflected by transportation, but they're not, there's other things that influence it as well. And, I've only looked at just the Washington market and the Texas market for this tool, just trying to give a general gauge and guideline. But I would think in general, whether you're in Washington, Oregon, or kind of the eastern side of Idaho, most of those calves are probably going to get fed out in a feedlot in that same area. There's a pretty good feeding area in that eastern Washington, western Idaho area. And there's also a packing plant there. And so that market is somewhat separate as compared to if you're in eastern Oregon. Well, maybe you're going to get shipped to Nebraska, Kansas to a feedlot, or maybe you'll get shipped back up to Washington. It's hard to say. I mean, it's based on what numbers are doing everywhere. Who needs the cattle?
Right. Well, it's very good. I mean, I think these tools are going to hopefully be useful for folks, like you said, just to be able to have that broader picture of what, is going to be a best decision for them and their whatever market they're going to and whatever, production that they're doing for their animals there in their management system. So,
one thing I'll say from a mainlander's perspective, just I haven't seen a lot of Hawaii cattle. I tend to run off the roads. I've been pulled over twice for drunk driving when I was only looking at cattle on the sides of the road. So I was swerving, had to get out and walk the line and prove that I was sober. But I look at cattle when I go past them. And then the limited amount of carcass data I've seen and some data that I've seen from the Hawaii Co-op, I think Hawaii competes fairly well with quality cattle. I think a lot of people on the mainland would think, oh, Hawaii, that's tropics, it's hot. The cattle probably are not that good at cattle. But the reality is where most of the cattle are grazing, it's a fairly temperate climate. I mean, it's 60 and 70 degree temperatures. Yeah. It's not the 95 and 100 degree.
Yeah, I don't think people realize the number
Arizona and Texas and
microclimates
Mexico.
We have here. Yeah.
And so the cattle quality, I think, match up very well with more northern mainland cattle quality. And so I think the cattle tend to be successful when they get shipped to the mainland and compete very well on rate of gains and carcass quality. So that's a positive for the Hawaii industry, is that they've maintained and I think continued to push for some pretty quality cattle.
Yeah, that's good to know and a good thing to hear, because I don't think, like Shannon said, when they think of Hawaii, we think of, white sandy beaches and very tropical climates and very hot, temperatures. But some of the more productive areas actually for our beef cattle is up in the sort of colder temperate areas of the island. Wonderful. And that's where a larger amount of the herds are, and where these cattle come from. So not to say that we don't have them in the warmer spots too, we do, but typically those that are going out into market or whatnot are in those kind of cooler regions. So thank you, Dillion, for joining us and sharing the tools with us. I think I hope folks, are able to use the tools. If they've got questions about the tools, feel free to reach out to us. We will make sure that Dillion's contact and everything is in there. Yes. Again, remember, there is a video portion to this podcast as well, so you can see the tools that he has displayed and we've talked and gone through on screen as well. Go ahead and use that to your best advantage.
Yeah.
And like I said, email us if you have any questions. But anything else you want to add, Dylan, before we close out?
No, I'm just, I'm coming to the end of my sabbatical that I've been here on Hawaii, but it's been a great experience. I've enjoyed working with you, Melly, and Shannon, and with Mark Thorne. I've enjoyed working with what producers I have been able to engage with.
Yeah.
I've certainly learned a lot and hope to be able to come back to the island over the next year or two and maybe again speak to some of these tools. If there's some updates that producers would like to see, be happy to make those. And it's been a good experience for me, and look forward to continuing to work with you into the future.
Yeah, we do. And, we do have another project coming up that we will be working on some more risk management tools and other educational opportunities for everybody. And I think with, sort of folks getting used to this more new normal of us, we'll be able to be in person a little bit more, and hopefully be able to have another tool when Dillion folks are done with the grass finish tool, be able to share that. And like you mentioned, hopefully have another field day that we can, be able to share some of this stuff with everybody in person. Yeah. So thank you again, Dillion, for joining us today.
Yes, thank you. And make sure to join our Facebook page, the Livestock Extension Group, if you haven't already. Be sure to visit the UHCTAR Extension website and our YouTube channel listed in the show notes, which is where you will get to see the live demonstration version of it. And as Dillion has been going through both of those or all of the tools, like step by step. So yeah.
And again, for additional information about this or any of our other topics or comments, send us an email at wala'au@hawaii.edu. Thanks again for listening to the Livestock Wala'au. Ahui ho.
Before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. Then stay tuned for next month's podcast. Thanks again to our sponsors, the Western Extension Risk Management Education Center, USDA NEFA, the Livestock Extension Group, and CTAR. Ahui ho.